Thank you for viewing this YouTube archive of a Conscious Consumer Network broadcast. Please feel free to share it far and wide. Check out our weekly broadcast guide for weekly updates on scheduled broadcasts. Help keep us on the air by contributing to our network support fund. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or get in touch via email. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do, all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement, and this is episode number 55. I'm Sue Patterson, and I'm filling in for Lainey Liberty, who's off on another worldwide adventure. I think the last time I heard from her, she was in Amsterdam the other day. I don't know where she is today, though. I'm thrilled that she invited me to step in and host this show for you tonight. I'm a homeschooling mom myself, but all my kids are now in their 20s. We started back in 1996. It was a fabulous adventure, and we loved learning. I'm also the editor of the Homeschooler Post, an online magazine for those interested in home education. I have several Facebook groups and pages, the largest being Unschooling Mom to Mom with over 8,000 members. I have a coaching practice if you want to work with me privately, if you're looking for a mentor. And all these links are available at the show notes page at consciousconsumernetwork.tv. You can look for the show For the Love of Learning, episode number 55. And you'll also find more about our panelists tonight, what they're up to and their projects and their interests. I wrote a book that was just published last fall called Homeschooled Teens, where I interviewed 75 young adults who talked about what their lives were like without school. And in the book, I shared about our family's experiences. But tonight, we're just going to talk with our three panelists. They participated in the book, and they're going to be sharing what their experiences have been. We'll find out how they learned, how they made friends, did they miss out on anything, and what they're doing now. I know it's all the questions that you really, really want to know. So I'm going to give a brief introduction for each of our panelists tonight, and we'll start with Jared Martin. Jared is a Los Angeles-based filmmaker. He began making films at the age of 8 using Star Wars action figures and stop-motion animation. By age 14, Jared had shot and directed a short documentary about a group of Sudanese refugees known as the Lost Boys, which played at numerous film festivals across the country and garnered 4 awards. A homeschooler for a majority of his childhood, Martin feels that this alternative educational choice aided his discovery of and his interest in the art, allowing him to fully live his passions, which ultimately drove him towards film school and his future career. He now works professionally in post-production as a film editor. His creative influences and role models include Billy Wilder, Errol Morris, Christopher Guest, Angus Wall, and George Lucas. Jared is a USC School of Cinematic Arts alumna. Jared, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Next, let's see. Let's go. Michael Patterson is 27, was born in Austin, Texas, and grew up in a military family. He went to preschool, kindergarten, and first grade in public school, all of which left him unhappy with the boredom of the classroom, and he was quickly losing his love for learning. Between his family's move from San Antonio to Alaska, they decided to try out homeschooling. School in a box, to be specific. It didn't take long to realize that Michael, along with his two sisters, would learn best through unschooling. And with each move, he and his family embraced the adventures that each new setting brought. Ice hockey in Alaska, horseback riding and vet care in California, ranching in Texas. All of it contributed to his feeling that unschooling allowed him to have an unrestrained education. He wasn't held back from his interests and curiosities. Michael's interest in other cultures and travel led him to Japan as an exchange student. After graduating magna cum laude from Texas State University with a degree in journalism and a minor in anthropology and archaeology, he spent 2 years in the Peace Corps, teaching English to high school teachers in a remote area of Nicaragua. He met and married his wife, Katia, in Nicaragua, and now they have recently bought a house in Dallas, Texas, where he works for Boy Scouts of America. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks. Glad to be here.
Okay. And Rose Harrington Sorooshlan is a grown unschooler who never attended K through 12 school. She has a degree in deaf studies from California State University, Northridge, and currently lives in Cyprus with her husband. Rose teaches American Sign Language, math, and science to homeschoolers and works at the North Orange County Community College District, teaching vocational and life skills to adults with intellectual disabilities. She loves to play tabletop games, watch and coach soccer, read and write novels, and try new things. She holds a 3rd-degree black belt in Kien Kung Fu, I hope I said that right, and has been teaching others the love of martial arts for almost 10 years. So those are our introductions. Rose, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So tell us a little bit about your families first. Rose, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I'm the youngest of 3, so I have 2 older sisters, Roya, who's now Roya Dato, some of you might know, and Roxana. My mom is a college professor. My father is an economist. They both are economists and actually met at USC, so go Trojans, Jared. Both my sisters went to school for a couple of years. My oldest sister went through 4th grade. My middle sister went through 2nd grade. And by the time it was time for me to start thinking about that, we had already decided to move into homeschooling. And like the Pattersons, we started with the school in a box curriculum thing for about a month, I think, and very quickly realized that we were going to be much more relaxed homeschoolers, and then very quickly moved from that into unschooling and then radical unschooling or whole life unschooling. So that's kind of how our story got started.
Okay, great. Jared, you want to tell us a little bit about your family?
Sure. So I'm an only child, just me and my parents growing up. And so our sort of discovery of homeschooling was sort of, a group effort, a group decision. It wasn't really my parents not wanting me to be in the school system, or anything like that. But actually, both my parents used to be teachers. They were both special ed teachers back in the day. But yeah, so it was really sort of they asked me what I wanted to do. I never really wanted to go to school, but the option was always on the table. If I wanted to, and they'd ask me occasionally, like, "Oh, hey, do you want to go to school now?" Or, no, that was never really on my mind until So basically, I was unschooled, completely unschooled by my parents until I was 14. And when I was 14, my private tennis coach, I was big into tennis at that age, and my private tennis coach became the high school tennis coach at Davis High School. And so he sort of instigated the whole, oh, well, hey, I want you to play on the team. And that's sort of what pushed me into an independent study program, which was essentially the same school curriculum that everyone else was doing, just at home. And I had a teacher I'd meet with once a week through the school district. So I never actually attended school in a traditional sense. And my first sort of traditional classroom experience wasn't until I was 18. So, a lot of the learning and education stuff that we did, it was more just learn through living. Pick up, fractions when you make cookies, or, stuff like that. Or, it's one of those things you don't really realize you're learning with everything you do, especially at such a young age. So, and that's sort of a mentality that I've carried on with into my adult life and professional life, is I'm sort of always hungry for learning, about everything, anything, whatever it is. If I want to get better at something, or I'm really into astrophysics and the universe now, so I'm, picking up stuff like that. But so very much so carried that, learn through living mentality through me.
All right. That's awesome, Jared. Thanks for sharing all of that. I think it's really interesting, when you've had a real unschooly background in the beginning, that you tend to face all of life in a different way than the kids that have been kind of had their learning doled out piece by piece by piece. It's interesting. Okay, Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about your family?
Okay. Well, my mom is moderating the event right now, so that tells a little bit about our involvement in homeschooling and unschooling, or really anything. Was that we immediately jumped full force into this. I will say that I was the oldest of three, and so like my mom said earlier when I was reading my bio, coming out of first grade, we were military, so we were moving all over the place. My dad was in the Air Force. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and I guess when I finally got to the point where I was about 7 years old, we just kind of realized that the school environment wasn't working well with me, and so because it was just me, I was the only one in school at that time. I think Katie might have started kindergarten, my younger sister. That would have been the only other one to really begin the schooling curriculum. But so we experimented, I guess, a little bit with me to see if I could do it the school at home style. I think we did it for about a year of school at home, waking up at the crack of dawn. And then immediately after moving to Alaska, starting a school curriculum then. So we would pick up at the crack of dawn. It's just pitch black out there. So it was already, I think that might have even been a bit of a factor into us having a whacked out idea of like, okay, so I know it's pitch black out right now, but it's 7 a.m. So I need to get up and start doing classes. So it was, I think, it just wasn't working. It didn't feel organic. It didn't feel in any way different from what we were doing in school. So in other words, we were getting the same negative result. So about a year after that, when Katie was ready to start school, we decided to do completely unschooling and learning by living, like Jared said. So we immediately were up to our necks in nature centers, in science museums for kids, scouts, just everything we could possibly be an experience to find something new. We were in there. When I talked to my peers and I talked about the things that I would do as a kid, and I started listing all of the things that I was doing simultaneously, they're just blown away. You were in 4-H, you were in scouts, you were in judo and jiu-jitsu, you were also in kung fu, you were also an exchange student. You're just listing the things that we were doing.
They're just like, how is that even possible? And I tell them, well, I had 8 hours a day more than you did. So yeah. But yeah, a little bit about our families. Like I said, my mom said, I'm married now. I'm now the proud owner of a 12-week-old Chihuahua Poodle puppy that's about this big and probably not going to get much bigger than that. And so that is kind of our little family nucleus now, me, my wife, and our puppy.
Maybe at the end of the show, you can give Winnie a little time on the
A little cameo for her.
Yeah, we can see what she's like. She's so cute. Okay. So lots of times people want to know what your typical day was like. Michael, you kind of touched on it a little bit with when it was it's when you did more school at home stuff, obviously you're home more. And when you're some families are home a lot, some families go out and do a lot of different things. Rose, you want to tell us a little bit about what your typical day was like? And I know there's nothing really typical, but if people can, the idea is to kind of help reassure them that that some of this chaos is okay. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your typical days and even little kids as well as your teen time.
Okay. So like I said, I'm the youngest. So I spent a lot of time kind of tagging along and doing a lot of what my sisters were doing. When we were younger, we spent a fair amount of time at home playing lots of games. Like Sue mentioned in my bio, I love tabletop games, and I get that from my parents and from my sisters. So we played a lot of games. We watched a lot of TV. The TV was always on kind of in the background while we were doing our other stuff. Lots of playing outside, arts and crafts, playing with dolls, all that kind of stuff. And lots of activities. We did Girl Scouts from before I can remember. We always went to at least one homeschool park day a week, sometimes more. We live in Southern California, so lots and lots of beach days. Lots of museums, nature centers, hikes, just lots of, I always tell people what they did on summer vacation, we just did that all the time. So lots of playing, lots of time spent out of the house. We joked a lot about car schooling. Spent a lot of time in our minivan. It is a well-loved car. But days at home too, long days at home spent playing games, playing dolls, cooking, having fun. I started community college when I was just about to turn 14. My mom, like I mentioned, is a teacher. She teaches at the community college that my sisters both started when they were pretty young, and I started right when I would have been going traditionally into 9th grade. So I would have been starting high school. Instead, I started at our community college. I started with dance classes, theater classes, voice classes, guitar, beginning piano, things like that. So nothing particularly strenuous. I still didn't have a lot of homework. So we ended up with a little bit more structure in our lives by the time all of us were in these classes. So it was play, have fun, do your own thing, except from 4 to 7 o'clock on Wednesdays, you have to go to class kinds of things. All the same things that Michael listed. I rode horses, I did martial arts, I did dance classes, I played soccer my whole life. So lots of structure that kind of fit into our chaos. And then as I got older, my life kind of took on more and more structure. So I feel like it happened really naturally. Very loosey-goosey kind of life when we were younger, just going with the flow, doing what we wanted to do. Slowly, more and more classes, more and more lessons, more and more groups and things that kind of had a structure to them. And then by the time I was about 17, I was a full-time student, and I had started teaching at my martial arts studio. So I was working about 4 days a week. So I became a pretty structured person and have quite a bit of structure in my life now. So it was a pretty natural progression up to that point. But definitely as teens, we spent a lot of time with my mom driving us from one place to another. Both of my sisters are very active and very busy, and all of us learned to drive a little bit later on. So a lot of time spent in the car shuffling us between all of our various activities, definitely.
Great. Okay. Jared, you want to tell us a little bit about typical days at the Martin household?
Sure. Yeah, no. I mean, basically, I mean, a lot of what both Michael and Rose have said already is very true for my experience as well. I mean, there's a lot of again, the learn through living thing I always go back to is it was very much paced by that. So like, I remember when I was younger, both my parents tried to get me to do some more formal like workbooks and stuff like that, which, for some things worked, some things didn't. A lot of the math, I'm totally not a math person. So math, was sort of the struggle point, or at least early on. But and very similar to Rose, I think as I got older, my life got more and more structured. But, early on, it was very much, a lot of TV. That was one cool thing about my parents is they let me self-regulate. So I would sort of, and this is sort of my nature, is I tend to dive into one thing at a time and do that one thing a lot. And then I OD. So I sort of, because they were so cool with that and so supportive of, all right, we'll just, try it. You need to learn for yourself how to manage it. I think I sort of learned my boundaries, and that's something I'm always sort of doing now too, is like, I sort of have to push the boundary a little bit to understand where I lie in relation, whatever it is I'm doing. So I have to sort of push it to the edge a little bit, and then come back and go, okay, that was too much. So with the TV, for example, maybe I'll watch TV for 10 hours a day, and then I'm like, okay, well, I feel terrible. I'm never going to do that again. But it's a lot of one of my closest friends was actually my neighbor who lived across the street. And he was totally opposite. He was like total school, like Christian school kid. But we were very close, and he would, especially when we were younger, he would come over and play all the time and stuff like that. And I did gymnastics when I was like 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 years old, and hang out with friends from there, but also a lot of, like Michael and Rose, going to the UC Davis Raptor Center or the Crocker Art Museum, or taking a day trip to, the Capitol or San Francisco, or, just so many, sort of thinking of the typical day of what my typical day was. I can't really just say one thing because it's so many things. But things definitely started to change as I, like I said, so at 14, I started Davis School for Independent Study. So just by nature of, there being now, because before, there weren't really requirements. My parents didn't set like, okay, well, you have to do this. It wasn't like school at home. It was, very free form. So once there was some sort of schedule in place, my life started to change a little bit. I think, at that time the structure was good. And looking back on it now, it was definitely a tough transition. But I think it was a good transition in the end. And then, once I started playing high school tennis and whatnot, then there's tennis practice every day. There's, lessons on the side. Also around that time is when I started teaching tennis too. I became a summer tennis camp counselor at our local tennis club, and that sort of mushroomed into something bigger. So that I started teaching more, taking private lessons, and it was actually sort of a nice little synergy that happened. So after I graduated from Davis School for Independent Study, I took a year off from all school. And I traveled, I worked at the tennis club quite a lot. I think almost full time at some points. And also finished the documentary about the Lost Boys of Sudan that I was working on. But that sort of the tennis job sort of mushroomed into something bigger. And then I eventually became the high school junior varsity tennis coach when I was like 19 or 19. So I don't know where the question was. I rambled a little bit. The typical day. So yeah, I mean, it's really all over the place, and that's what was so cool about it was, you're able to explore things because you're not penned in. You're able to explore things that you wouldn't normally be able to. So I think because of that, that really allowed me to explore my true passion and what really drove me. I was able to make films, and filmmaking takes a lot of time, especially when it's a one-man show and you're 8. So I may have realized that at some point if I had gone to school, but it definitely would have been different. And I don't know if I would have truly realized, how big of a passion it was, or, it's who knows. But I personally feel that because of homeschooling, it, really brought that out and sort of caused me to go, this isn't just a little fun thing you're doing. This is something bigger. So I'm very grateful to have had that experience.
I know all 3 of these from their childhood, so it's interesting to hear some of this. Jared, I remember your mom really, really protecting your time. That if you were in the middle of doing something and you were trying to stage it and the film was happening, well, they'll be here eventually, because that was the priority. She was like making your interest the priority. It was cool.
She was my momager.
Right. Okay, Michael, you want to tell us a little bit about typical days?
Typical days, just to kind of give the things that we would do every day. It always involved getting in the car. There was not a day that we were not driving somewhere. If you've got that many things on your plate, to get all that kind of exposure, we were just, man, I don't know how many times you probably had to change the oil in those cars because you guys were just going all over the place, and not always close either. Sometimes we were driving out far to go something. So it was there was a lot going. I can even remember actually there were just things that we could do in the car that we would do. Like we'd have certain music. We were always buying kind of educational music or something like that. When we were little, it works, I guess. I'll never forget some sort of tape that we had about dinosaur music, and it was every song was a different dinosaur or something like that, and we would just go and go and go. But Animaniacs, what else? Schoolhouse Rock, just that kind of stuff all the time. And I guess when we weren't driving, when we were home, in the beginning, like Rose said, it was chaos. But just listening and thinking more about it, I like to say it was constructive chaos. There was never a moment that something didn't happen that we didn't turn around and try to learn from. Whether it was, I'm just thinking about when we're moving from California to Texas, and Dad was towing a boat. The tire catches on fire or something, or and melts through the axle, and we had to leave this boat that me and him had worked on the side of the road. And it was a horrific experience. It was once again driving, but I guess at the same time it reminded me the importance of maintaining your vehicles, or because I remember our trailer was not exactly. It was one that I think we had got with the boat, so it was in none too good a condition. But I think at home, a lot of free reign over our time. But at the same time, I think that you and Dad kind of would put things in front of us a lot of the time. Sometimes it was a workbook type thing, some sort of math thing. I noticed that was more for me. I noticed that maybe it was because I was the oldest one, and maybe Mom was starting to get worried that he's gonna like take an SAT here someday soon, and he needs to be able to pass that. Which I never took. I never took the SAT. I was against it. But I think I think back on the idea, there was always something put in front of us that was educational. I remember tons and tons of like jumpstart computer games that were just on and on. You're trying to stop robots from changing history or something like that. And but in order to do that, you had to like get battery juice or something like that, which means you had to go down to the generator and like do all this weird math stuff to get the battery juice. And I think I had the bad habit of wanting to know what happens next in the story, so I would put everything on the super easy difficulty so that I could pass it super fast. And that way I wouldn't have to like go at my level. I was like, I wanted to find out what happened next, and so I think there was a lot of that. And then typical days. I'm trying to think if there's things that we would do every day, things like that. I think in the beginning, I can't think of anything there. No day was typical. It was there was just every day was another day, and there was something else going on. I don't even really feel like there was much of a schedule sometimes. I think there were just some days we took what came at us, and other days, yeah, we knew something was coming and we were building up to it, like Cub Scout day camp or something like that. But I feel like yeah, definitely getting older, becoming a teenager. Structure starts finding its own way into your life, rather than I don't feel like my mom or my dad or anybody really put structure in my life, or I feel like it's just something that your interests start narrowing a little bit, because as you get older, you realize you only have a finite amount of time in the day, and you want to spend it on stuff that you're interested in. And so what ends up happening is you start budgeting your time. I think that just happens naturally, just because it just clicks in your head, like, oh, it's Tuesday night. Well, I go to judo practices on Tuesday night. Like, oh, it's Saturday. That means this is the time to go to the movies or something like that. You just naturally start to introduce your own structure. And then when I hit community college and then eventually college, I actually had a class schedule that I had to follow. So it was that was the first time a schedule had been introduced into my life, like as far as like what I was doing from 9 to 10, and then from 10 to 11, and then 11 to 12. And I remember, because I remember my very first class was about 6:30 in the mornings, and it was about a 20-minute drive from our house to the community college campus. So that meant I was up at 5:30 to go to a 6:30 class, basically just rolling out of bed and going to the class. And then continuing with the rest of the day after that. And there wasn't like you get to roll out of class and go to class, come back home and sleep anymore. No, you got to go, because it's 20 or 30 minutes away. You just had to keep on going. And so, yeah, I definitely feel like I was given a lot of free rein to decide what to do with my time early on. And then the next thing I know, because I want to do things with my time, I just starts to form a structure.
Go ahead, Jared.
Yeah, no, just what Mike was saying made me think of something else. And, that was one thing I really loved about homeschooling, because you're not set into a set structure. You have to be doing this from this time to this time and that time to that time. If something happens spontaneously and you want to go do that thing, whatever that might be, having the freedom to do that is so awesome, and it's so fun. Like, I remember so many times where, it'd be winter time, it'd be raining, and just get this like flash flood warning, and then just going out with like rain boots and a big coat and just playing in the rain or playing in the mud or, whatever it is, or digging a ditch. I remember me and my mom out in the rain once digging trenches in the rain in the backyard to funnel the water. And so, that's one thing that I really miss being an adult, or being, having more of a scheduled life now, is like, getting to enjoy little things like that. And I'm so happy that I had that experience, to just, oh, hey, something's happening, just go take advantage of it, go do it, go try it. And I think that's especially when you're young, is really, really essential to just life and your education and learning and everything.
Yeah, I think too, it's interesting that all of you have touched on the idea that while you had this unstructured time, it really did not hamper you, didn't cause a problem for you later to move into structure. Lots of times parents think, and society in general tells us, we got to have them practice all this structure because how will they manage? And, you don't have to practice waiting in line. You don't have to practice all those things that are really going to happen. And when it's like you mentioned about getting a job and getting up early and getting to classes and managing all that, I do agree with y'all that it's developmentally you start to be able to manage it yourself. And isn't that a much better way than only to discover at age 19, now it's all in your lap. So you were able to kind of practice that a little bit and let it kind of more organically move along. So that was kind of cool. Do you guys want to talk a little bit more, and just go ahead and speak up whatever one wants to talk about your hobbies and how those, Jared, you mentioned a little about how your tennis evolved into something bigger. And I know that that's happened for Michael and Rose too, how hobbies, a parent might think, it's just a little hobby, it's not a big deal. And you just never know how one thing's going to connect to another and connect to another and connect to another. So who wants to talk a little bit about some of the hobbies and how those kind of morphed for you now that you can look back in your 20s, look back at what you did as a teenager, or how that moved along for you? Anybody want to jump in?
I guess I feel like my hobbies just kind of went from this constant progression of one to the next. And I think I might be kind of unique in that sense, in that it's just like the hobby was constantly different all the time, and I would delve in to so many different things, and I would spend as much time as I liked on them. So it's kind of I wouldn't say that any one of them like turned into a career, but I definitely would say that there were several hobbies that that ended up really affecting me. Travel, for one, I think is the big one. After hosting an exchange student when I was 12 from Japan, resolved to go to Japan, be an exchange student myself. Then I studied abroad in Belize, and I worked with archaeology in basically pirate areas in the Keys, and then after that, when it was a Peace Corps volunteer in Nicaragua, and I was out there teaching English and doing a lot of volunteer work, and I guess that can turn into that was another hobby that kind of was a constant throughout my adolescent period, was volunteering. I was constantly in either a highway cleanup, or a soup kitchen handout, or a Toys for Tots giveaway, and then onward and onward. And then whenever I would get involved in student groups in college, or other stuff later on, I was constantly trying to get them to volunteer for more stuff. Let's go out and do more stuff. And that was just something it just slowly turned from just something fun to do on a weekend to something that I was looking for the next chance to go do, looking for the next chance to go volunteer for somebody. And then culminating, I guess, more in in my Peace Corps experience, that was something that I probably had as a goal since I was probably 9, and understood what the Peace Corps was. And that just like, that was probably one of my real motivations to go to college, because I knew I could only get into the Peace Corps if I had a college degree. And so that was just kind of like, well, that's something I'm gonna have to do, I guess. And then now I work for Boy Scouts, and I'm working with hundreds, if maybe thousands of volunteers, almost on a daily basis. And I work basically on their schedules and that. So that means I work my 40-hour work week, and then I have to handle probably another 40 hours worth of their volunteer time. Because God forbid the guy who's taking the money actually get away with the easy job. So, but yeah, I guess like if as far as hobbies, just kind of slowly progressing from one to the next. Eventually, yeah, this volunteering and travel became something that was important enough for me to actually end up making a career out of it. So maybe I was wrong. Actually, I am wrong. It did become a career.
Okay, Rose.
Yeah, when it comes to making careers out of hobbies, I'm kind of with Michael, where I definitely have done that. I teach sign language, and I teach math and science to homeschoolers. And so that sign language was absolutely a hobby for me. I took a class at my community college because it seemed like fun. Coincidentally, later on, it happened to count for my foreign language credit, so that was a nice bonus. But I had a friend that said, I'm taking ASL, you want to take it with me? And I said, yeah, sure, that sounds like a good time. And so I just got into it for fun. It was a hobby. It was something I liked to do. And then I kept doing it, and it kept being fun, so I decided to go get an interpreting certificate. That was fun, so I decided to go get a bachelor's degree in it. And it just kind of kept moving along. And then I worked as an interpreter for a little while, and it eventually led into both of my jobs, which is I teach sign language to homeschoolers. And then it actually, in kind of a weird roundabout way, led into me teaching in this disabled students program. I've had a lot of hobbies that have lasted many years or even my whole life. I played soccer since before I could do almost anything else. My dad has always coached me. I played soccer for 15 years on a team, and the second I was too old to play on a team anymore in our region, I started coaching, and I still have been coaching for the last 6 or 7 years. So that's still an important hobby in my life. I started Kung Fu when I was 12, and got my black belt a couple of years later and jumped into teaching Kung Fu. And just yesterday, I was at a black belt test at that same studio. So some of my hobbies have lasted my whole life, or for years and years and years. And then some hobbies have come and gone a little bit more. I rode horses for 5 or 6 years, and it was very intense, and it was all I did. And those of you who are horse people know when you ride horses, you do horses and only horses to a certain extent. So I was at the barn at 6 in the morning to feed, and back in the afternoon for lessons, and mucking out stalls, and did that very intensely through my 4-H club, and then kind of let that fall away and moved on to the next thing. So some of my hobbies I have done very intensely for a short amount of time and then kind of let drop. I've dabbled in lots and lots of different things and then let them slide away. And some things have been my life since the beginning and very intensely. And I'm really grateful that I had so much time. Like Michael said earlier, I had 8 extra hours every day that I got to do stuff. So while a lot of other people who are in school might have had to pick one thing, you know, they had to say, I'm going to do Kung Fu or soccer, it's horseback riding or Girl Scouts. I got to do pretty much everything I wanted to do. I had enough time to do it all. And of course, I had parents that allowed me to do some things very intensely. I had a mom that was driving me to the stables at 6 o'clock in the morning and was there with me and allowed me to do this thing very, very intensely. And then the second that I said, I think I'm satisfied. I think I'm done with this for a little while. It wasn't, well, we've invested all this time and all this money and all this effort. No, you have to keep going. It was, okay, cool. What's next? What are we moving on to? So looking back, it's easy to see kind of how my hobbies and how my life led up to this point. It's a lot harder to look forward and say, oh, well, my kid is into this thing, so clearly they're going to do this job in the future. They're going to be into this in the future. Because maybe they'll be really into that thing for 2 weeks and then they'll drop it, or maybe that will be the thing that they do for the rest of their lives and that's their career forever. So I think the really important thing is to support your kids intensely, support them passionately, assume that this is the great, wonderful love of their life, that they're going to do this so intensely, and then if they're ready to drop it, cool, what's the next thing, and move on.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I can't say I had a ton of hobbies. Looking back on it, I especially compared to these two, I like I said before, I tended to, and I still do, I'm very much this way, focus on one sort of thing at a time and really just dive into that and do that, only that, so I can focus all my attention. I'm not sort of, and this is something I've had to learn too, is to multitask and do multiple things at one time, which I have gotten pretty good at doing that because you sort of have to in the film industry. But looking back on it, it's sort of, I was always very driven towards storytelling or story type things. So whether it's a film, it's a script, I remember I made this comic book series when I was like 9, and I'd stay up all night and just my hand would be like a claw the next morning because I would just be drawing these little pencil drawings and erasing and doing it all over again. And sort of, I remember I used to bring them to park days and hand them out to people, and people would get very excited about that, and that was always cool, having sort of an audience. It was sort of my first audience. But I will say that one thing I was sort of, and still am grateful for, I tend to be a very impatient person. If something's not clicking right away, it's like, okay, let's move on. Next thing, what's next? And I credit both my parents for sort of stopping me at times and saying, okay, well, just give it another, and of course, give it another chance or another week or another day, whatever it is. And if I was really intense about it, if I really didn't want to do it, they would respect that. But I think sometimes I do tend to move on too quickly. So there were some things, like I remember piano, my mom taught me piano. And I didn't want to play, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I wanted to play like Beethoven, like Fur-Elise, from the get-go. And my mom would sit down and teach me, and I'd play the song, and I'd get really upset and storm off because I wouldn't get it. And then she'd be like, oh yeah, that's fine. Let's come back and try it again. And I'd get it that time around. But, if I wouldn't have had that influence there sort of keeping up with me and guiding me, I think some things wouldn't have stuck. But in terms of, that filmmaking, I guess, sort of started as a hobby, or storytelling started as a hobby. But I never thought of it as a hobby. I always thought of it as, this is what I want to do. There's never, thinking back, I can't remember any time where I was like, had any idea in my mind other than, okay, well, I want to be a filmmaker. So, I think that having the freedom to explore that really allowed me to realize that. But yeah.
That's great. Okay. So let's move to another area that people worry about, and that's your social life. They want to know, how do you make friends? How do you find people to date? If you didn't when you were younger, how is that when you transition to college or go off later? How does all of that all play together? You guys have really described a life that's full of getting out into the world. So that idea that social life, you're stuck at your table at home, doesn't really fit. It's not a real thing. So who wants to talk a little bit about how they made friends, what that looked like as you were growing up as maybe a young person, and then as a teen, and then transitioning into adulthood? Whoever wants to go first can jump right in there, or everybody's going to say, oh. Go ahead.
I talk about that. Yeah, definitely, like you said, we were out and about a lot. I did a lot. I did Girl Scouts. I did 4-H. I rode horses. I did soccer. I danced. I did this. I did that. So I never lacked for just basic social interaction. I definitely had a lot of people to talk to and hang out with. I have 2 sisters, and we're very close. They're still my best friends. I see them every single day still. So I grew up with my 2 best friends. We started going to one specific park day right when we started homeschooling. And I made a core group of friends there, many of whom I'm still very good friends with today, all of whom I'm still in some kind of contact with. Some of them I'm less close to, some of them I'm very close to. One of them actually was in my wedding last June. So I met him when I was 4 years old, and literally 20 years later, he stood up with me while I got married. So definitely park days. Most of my very close friends when I was young, I met through homeschooling, whether it was homeschool park days or homeschooling classes at my Kung Fu studio or my homeschooling Girl Scout troop, but definitely lots of homeschoolers. And I gravitate towards the unschoolers generally just because they tended to be the people that I clicked with, and also the ones that had more free time. The school at homers tended to, be busy during school hours. So definitely I tended towards unschoolers, but I had friends that kind of ran the gamut between school at home all the way to radical unschooling. And then I played soccer. So I had a nice crowd of publicly schooled, very traditionally publicly schooled girls, and then young women my age that I, again, met when I was very young. I was 4 when I started playing with most of these people, and then kind of grew up with them. Got to experience high school kind of peripherally through all of their experiences and hang out with them at soccer practice and listen to the drama and the stuff and everything that was going on in their lives without actually having to go through it myself. Some of whom, again, I'm very close to still. I've a friend who's going to have a baby shower in a couple of weeks who I met when I was little playing soccer with her. So having enough friends and enough people to hang out with has never been a big problem. And definitely I feel like I've been able to make really deep relationships and lasting relationships because I spent so many hours with these people. Like our park days started at 10 in the morning and sometimes went until 10 or 11 at night. So I got just hours and hours and hours to hang out with these people and talk to them and get to know them, as opposed to, I have this class and I can talk in passing period and maybe we have the same lunch period and maybe not. And we can spend 2 hours together after school, except I've got homework and that kind of lifestyle. I just had so much time to spend with my friends. And then when it comes to dating, both boyfriends I've ever had, I met through my martial arts studio. My first boyfriend was a very, very traditionally publicly schooled kid. Again, I met him, he was a black belt, I was a black belt, so we had classes together and things like that, and we dated for a couple of years. And then I started dating the person who is now my husband. We met when I was 12, when I first started my martial arts studio. We were friends for 5 years or so before we started dating, and then dated about 7 more years after that, before he got married last June. And he was eclectically homeschooled, is how I like to say it. He went to school for just kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. And then he got pulled out and they did school in a box. They did everything. They did Calvert curriculum. They did a little bit of this, a little bit of that, kind of throw it all at the wall and see what sticks sort of homeschooling. And I'm very grateful for the fact that he had that homeschooling experience. His homeschooling life was a lot more structured than mine. He had a high school graduation. He went to winter formal. He went to prom. He did kind of more traditional high school things than I did. But definitely when it came time for us to start talking about our future and what our life was going to look like together eventually, this idea of homeschooling was kind of automatic for us. And the idea of this radical unschooling, let your kids lead the way, follow their passions, he was on board immediately. So I think it helped us a lot and kind of moved us forward very quickly that we had these similar backgrounds.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, I guess socially for me, I think I spent a lot of time, like we said, we had so many activities that were super social, and so kind of not a whole lot more needs to be said about that, just because it kind of self-explanatory that I'm in all of these groups, and they're all social active groups, so that kind of defeats the argument of the stereotype that homeschoolers or unschoolers are under socialized. I'd even say that probably based on the times that I would then go to something like Scouts, where I was the only homeschooled kid or like one of two homeschooled kids in the group. I feel like we were I've been going through a lot of job training right now, and one of the things they're trying to talk about is emotional intelligence. And it's more than just being able to recite numbers or equations or facts. This is more about being able to gauge your own emotions when you're talking to somebody, or gauge somebody else's emotions while they're talking to you. Understand when somebody's just being sarcastic versus actually angry about something like that. And I feel like a lot of the kids that I was hanging out with, in the moment, it was weird. I mean, in that like sometimes we'd have something to be hunky dory, everything's going okay, and then all of a sudden somebody's really mad, and we don't know how we got there. And a lot of time, I think probably a lot of the adults would just chalk it up to emotionally unstable teenagers. Whereas I'm just as blown away as the adults, and like, what happened just now? Why are we suddenly at each other's throats? And also in other times, because like sometimes in the other way around, like sometimes kids would going through things that kids go through when they're teenagers. I feel like I was very adept at being able to understand what's happening, or be able to at least understand how to emotionally deal with something when it's happening to me. Because it turns out, like, I had school friends that would end up coming to me and they would ask me, like, what is going on here? And I'm like, well, just think about it for a second. And I feel like I was always the calm one. It sounds stupid to say, but I feel like a lot of the time something would happen at a Boy Scout camp out, for example, and somebody did something that somebody didn't like, or got stuck with a job they didn't want to do, and would immediately think that it's personal, or is it some sort of this is something to do with him versus me, and I just and sometimes they would come to me and kind of tell me their problem, tell me their story, and I tell them, like, let's just think about that for a second before you even say that it was about you. I bet he's not even thinking about you. I mean, just think for a second. It's not that big of a deal. And so I feel like I was equipped to deal with it that way. So I don't know if I can say that homeschooling or unschooling made me more socially or emotionally intelligent or something like that. But I feel like perhaps it was because all of our learning was through social interaction versus a classroom setting. And I've been a teacher, and so I know the difference. Just because you sit next to somebody doesn't mean you're socializing with them. You sit next to people on the bus. You sit next to people on flights. You sit next to somebody in the movie theater. I don't know anything about them. I didn't exchange a word with them. I do not consider that socializing. And so if you're in that same situation, I mean, granted, when you're in a school setting, yes, you will eventually talk to the person that's sitting next to you, because you're going to be sitting next to them for hours, day after day. But I would still bet that the educational experience is still coming from a teacher to a student, versus when you're in homeschooling or unschooling, even when you're in like a co-op class or something like that, we're all in little groups, we're working together. It's they're encouraged not to talk to each other during class. They actually cut off the social aspect of learning, versus all of our learning is completely about using the social environment that you're in to learn. And so I would say that if it is true that because I've been reading some statistics about emotional intelligence, and they said that as kids, homeschooled, unschooled kids are much more emotionally intelligent than their schooled counterparts, and that's what I attribute that to, because all of our learning experiences are in some sort of social form. It's not listen to a hierarchical system of one to coming down to another. This is literally a bunch of people kind of like banging into walls and maybe moving slower or moving in odd directions, but they're learning through their little social group.
This is one of my favorite questions, because I have this. I love doing this with people who don't know that I'm homeschooled now, because I'll sort of drop that bomb and say, "Oh yeah, well I was homeschooled," and they kind of go, "What?" Like, "Oh, like I basically like I couldn't tell," as if like you're left with some mark that, oh hey, that kid was homeschooled. And you know, I find that the homeschooled kids, my homeschooled friends, tend to be, you know, they're able to talk with adults easier. They're able to sort of converse socially in a lot more of a comfortable manner. It seems more genuine and true, you know, stuff like that. But I had friends from all over. I mean, I had friends like my friend across the street. I met kids at gymnastics class, tennis class. Still some of my closest friends I met at tennis. And definitely the high school tennis team. There's, you know, you sort of become a big family, which was sort of weird my first year, because you're sort of thrown in and hear everyone, you know, everyone's 14, 15. They've been in school with the same group of people for their entire lives. And here you're sort of this outsider, you come in and, you know, they don't know you, you don't know them. So there was sort of a weird transition period there. I remember that first tennis year being sort of difficult or a bit of a rough transition, just because there was a lot of history there that you're not a part of. So there's, you know, things like inside jokes and, you know, stuff like that, and that you soon become privy to. But you know, again, still those are some of my closest friends to this day. And I remember looking back and having this one friend in particular on the tennis team who was so fascinated by doing something different. He himself never would have switched. He never would have, you know, unschooled or homeschooled or done independent study or anything like that. But he was so, I mean, I took him around my independent study facility one day, I remember, and he was just so like fascinated by the fact that I was doing something different, or that my, you know, like, well, like that same old thing. Well, what did you do all day? Or how did you make friends? That whole thing. And, but, you know, I had a very eclectic friend group, from park days to tennis, gymnastics. You know, you can make friends anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in school or not.
Something that Jared said just made me think of a story I like to tell sometimes about this idea that unschoolers or homeschoolers are marked as adults, and that everyone can tell what you are once you're all grown up. Which I feel like I should preface this story by saying now that many of my closest and dearest friends are completely traditionally public schooled people who are wonderful. I've met them in college and through my sorority and work. So I don't only have homeschooled friends, but I did have a situation when I was at my community college in my interpreting program, sitting around a big table doing homework, prepping for a test. And the subject of homeschooling came up, and it came out that I was a grown homeschooler. And one of my friends just went off, started talking about homeschooling, and homeschoolers are unsocialized and they're weird and they can't do this, and focusing very strongly on the social aspect of homeschooling and what a negative it is, and how poorly it affects people, and very nicely said to me, well, you're the exception, of course, but you're the exception, and most homeschoolers are weird and they can't socialize and all these things. And I nodded and let him kind of ramble on, and he finished, and I pointed to one of the other guys sitting at the table with us and said, well, did you know that David was homeschooled too? And his face kind of went pale, and he kind of backed up and he went, well, I mean, okay, so you're both an exception. And I went, yeah, sure. Pointed at someone else. Nate was homeschooled too. And I went around the table, and about out of the 10 people sitting there, I think 8 of us happened to be homeschoolers, and he didn't realize. So he thought all along he could tell, and obviously couldn't. But it has been interesting to me in my life. Like I said, I have many dear, close friends that are public schooled, but I have tended in my college life and in my work life, I'll meet someone and just kind of gravitate towards them and think, man, this person's really cool. I feel like we connect a lot. And then maybe a year or 2 or 3 later, it'll come up in conversation, and I'll be like, you were homeschooled? I was homeschooled. So I do think there's something there. There's something in us that maybe you can't see it from the outside, but we can see it in each other a little bit.
Yeah, and I would add that I mean, are you shocked when you find that somebody from a public school or went to just a traditional school setting isn't well socialized, isn't sociable? And I see this all the time, and nobody really said anything there. And yeah, you know what? We're gonna run into some kids that are homeschooled that are not sociable. They're introverted, that are just kind of maybe a little off. But I always think back to myself whenever I meet that person or something like that, because I would meet them at conferences, or I'd meet them just all over the place. Now I meet a lot of them in scouting, because we have like all homeschool groups that we work with. And you meet some kids that are like, yeah, we're gonna work with you a little bit. But then I think to myself, like, imagine that kid in a school setting, that he would be like fresh meat, or she would be fresh meat. And I would just always think, you know what? I can't think of a more safe place for someone that isn't good in a social setting than a social setting that is completely up to you, that you take it at your own pace, that you kind of work with it in the bite sizes that you're able to handle, versus force-fed cookie cutter style, which might actually be horribly traumatizing to you and make you worse. And I think now, I mean, granted, unschooling and homeschooling is still a pretty young movement comparatively. I would say, I feel like, well, my mom's shaking her head, but I don't meet it very many homeschoolers or unschoolers that are in their 30s or 40s. I feel like kind of in the top end, I think, of the kids that have come through the program. I just haven't met that many 30s and 40-year-old unschoolers or homeschoolers. But every single one that I've met that is in their 20s is well adjusted and well high functioning. Even ones that I knew younger that were a little off, but got it back together again because they worked at their own pace. And I've met a lot of adults that went through a public school system that I can imagine that you were just like that kid growing up, just kind of not socially ready for those certain circumstances. And they never got any better. Or I would say they often developed sort of more negative ways of handling things, either isolating themselves or becoming aggressive and asserting themselves when it's completely unnecessary. And so socially, I would say that there isn't a more a safe way, I would say, or a more self-paced way than homeschooling or unschooling. And that's the real. And then it just kind of blows my mind that that's the stereotype, that we're the unsociable ones.
Couldn't find my unmute there for a second. I was like, oh no, can't. You guys are so insightful, and I am so happy that we're able to share all of this kind of stuff with everybody. We're going to take a little break, and the viewers are going to get to watch a little clip from Class Dismissed, which is a documentary that was made a couple of years ago by some homeschoolers in California. And basically the movie, if you haven't gotten a chance to see it, you really should. And I think I know you can rent it. I know you can buy it on DVD, and I'm pretty sure it might even be at Netflix now. I'm not sure, but the gist of it is a family that has decided to leave school, like so many other families, that they just became dissatisfied with what was going on, and they decided to try it out. And they went through lots of different morphing of how to do it, and try this, try that. That's not really it either. That's not, and they eventually found their way. But it's really awesome to be able to follow this family through. And this little clip is just a little bit, one of the trailers that they had for the movie. It's just a couple of minutes of that might give people an idea of how they could maybe look at all of this a little bit differently, how they could look at their school situation, their educational system just a little bit differently. So we'll just go on to the clip as soon as we're ready here.
School is about preparing kids for the real world, but then we don't let them get involved in the real world for the full time that they're in these institutions.
Education has become something that's a part of the government. It's something that we do as a nation rather than something we did as a community.
There's an assumption that schooling is providing an education, and that's not necessarily so.
In a world where I can pull out my smartphone and Google anything I want, I don't need to have a teacher telling me facts. What I need is a guide helping me to apply that knowledge.
What's necessary is for people to start rethinking some of these words, like learning, because we associate learning with a schoolroom.
The idea that kids are this entire human being and are interacting with the world, not just a teacher in a classroom, is still new to so many adults.
The general public's conceptualization of homeschooling is you break out a book and start lecturing to them and teaching them everything.
We are all born with a motivation to learn, and if we can just continue to keep that alive for kids, then the learning takes care of itself.
I think the biggest misconception is that homeschooling happens at home.
The schools have done a really good job of making families feel inadequate and that you're really not qualified to direct your child's education.
I feel like I'm pretty well prepared for anything that comes along my way.
I wish all kids had the choice to homeschool.
From the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep, they're learning.
Learning is like breathing, and it feels so good when it's not forced.
If somebody asks me, hey, do you want to learn about this? Then I'll usually say yes.
We're all really obsessed with product. What did you do? How did you perform? What's your grade? Show me the work that you did.
Schooling is like teaching to the test, and education is learning because you want to know it.
We're never out of school because we're never out of life.
I'm more confident that I could go out there and do what I feel passionate to do with my life.
Okay, so now we're back with Rose and Michael and Jared, and grown homeschoolers that are here to tell us a little bit about their lives and answer some of those questions that you have been always wanting to know. So I think it would be good to talk a little bit about college and how it was. Some of you mentioned a little bit about taking community colleges classes while you were teenagers and using that during what was probably kind of what a lot of people would consider high school years. And but tell us a little bit about how it was transitioning to that, how you got in, how it felt while you were there. How did that work for you? And then we'll do some other stuff afterwards. So who wants to Who's ready? Who got a drink of water and is ready to go? All right, Rose.
Yeah, so college has always been a big part of my family's makeup and our lives. My mom is a college teacher. She teaches at the community college in our town, and she's been teaching there since long before I was born. So I grew up on that college campus. I ran up and down those hallways. I played games there. I sat and read. I knew where every snack shack was and which one had the candies I liked the best. I knew that campus backwards and forwards. And when I was, let's see, she's 6 years older than I am. So when my oldest sister was 14-ish, she started taking classes there. So again, when she hit about what would have traditionally been her high school years, and I think she probably was maybe ready for a little bit more focused learning. She had two younger sisters, and our lives were still kind of in that loosey-goosey stage. And she talks about walking past the ceramic studio at our community college and saying, I want to do that. How do I do that? And as it turns out, there was a waiting list about a mile long for that class, so she needed to build up some credits so that she could get a higher registration date. So she took some other classes and eventually got into the ceramics program there, and ended up being at Cypress College for a long time. And then my next sister kind of followed along in the same path, except her route into college classes was through theater. She's a big theater person, always has been, and her thing was wanting to be in shows, which she had done a lot of community theater and children's theater, but college level theater, community college level theater is kind of a step up in quality and in rehearsal and everything. So she kind of jumped into taking voice classes and theater classes and eventually doing shows at that college. So when I was 13, about 2 weeks away from turning 14, so just about 14, it seemed pretty natural that I would follow in that path. Our lives at that point were very much in kind of a college schedule. I had grown up knowing about semesters and summer breaks and scantrons and what a timed test means and all those kinds of things. I helped my mom grade economics tests when I was a little kid, running down the scantrons. I felt very, very comfortable and very well versed. And our lives had always kind of followed this pattern of, yeah, mom's got class this semester from this time to this time on these days. I knew that our semesters at that school were 16 weeks long. I was very, very knowledgeable about colleges in general and specifically about this particular community college. So when it came time, when I realized I wanted to do a little bit of theater and some dance and voice, it seemed really easy and natural that I would take classes at the college because my sisters were already going there. My mom was already going there. I'll just hop in the car and kind of join along. So I took a voice class my first semester, a 1-unit voice class. There was one-page paper at the end of the semester. That was it. And it was, I already knew the teacher. My sister had taken a class with her. She knew my mom. It was just a very, very natural progression, a very natural extension. It felt really comfortable. The next semester, I think I took another voice class and maybe a piano class, and it built very slowly. I took lots of theater, lots of dance. I eased into 3-unit classes in the theater department. So it was a 3-unit class that had a final, but it was still musical theater class or stage makeup, things like that. So it was a slow and easy transition. And then when I was a slightly older teen, 16, 17, somewhere in there, I'm not sure when, I decided to maybe branch out a little bit more, take more classes in other departments. And I started looking into the idea of maybe transferring to a 4-year university. And then I took a sign language class. And at that point was like, okay, I'm obviously going to go state college. And we have 2 different state college systems, so I had lots and lots of options. But when it came time for me to actually start thinking about what schools I was going to apply for, there's one school that does sign language, has a really great deaf studies program, and so I knew I wanted to go to Cal State Northridge. So I looked to see, okay, what do I need to take? What are the requirements? Some of them I happened to have already completed. I had been interested in taking an English class. So check that was out of the way. I had been interested in taking a history class, so boom, that one was already done. So some things were already completed, some things I had to purposefully say, okay, I need 2 science classes in a lab. What am I going to take? But everything was really fun. Even the things that I was maybe not just taking for the pure blissful enjoyment of it, the things that I was taking to check off a box, I still really enjoyed and I still really had a good time. I took an astronomy class with a lab, which I would never have taken. It was not something that was really on my radar, but I needed a science class and the timing worked out with my schedule. And my boyfriend was free at the same time. So we said, okay, sure, we'll take this astronomy class. And I learned a tremendous amount and I had a wonderful time. And so even the classes that were a little bit more like, just get through it so you can move on, I really enjoyed. At my college, you can take a math placement test and test out of remedial math classes. Had time. I wasn't in any big rush or any big hurry, so I went through the extra 2 years of math classes and enjoyed them tremendously. I enjoyed math so much I was going to minor in it. So it was kind of a silly use of my time in one way, but also I really enjoyed it. So then I transferred to Cal State Northridge, which is about an hour away from my house. So I moved into the dorms and lived in the dorms at CSUN, Cal State Northridge. I was a deaf studies major as a junior, so I was hopping right into taking classes that were in my field of interest. They were a lot harder all of a sudden. My community college classes none of them had been so challenging that I hadn't been able to handle it. I was a straight A student up until that point, and I got to Cal State Northridge, and they were a lot more challenging and a lot of fun and completely 100% what I was interested in and what I was passionate about. And so I managed to maintain that straight A thing and learned a ton and made connections and some of my best friends. And again, it was kind of a natural transition. It was the natural next step. The campus was a little bit bigger. I wasn't living at home anymore. My classes were a little harder, but it wasn't the kind of culture shock that I witnessed with some of my friends. I rushed a sorority and so very quickly made friends with a lot of people who were coming from a very traditionally publicly schooled background and jumping into this as freshmen, moving out of their parents' house, graduating high school, and all of a sudden being in the dorms. Their schedule is their own to make. What they're eating is their own. They have to do their laundry for the first time. They don't know how to clean their dorm rooms, things like that. And it was a huge culture shock for them. I had 2 roommates that were sophomores. And even as sophomores, having gone through an entire year, passed all their classes the first year, they were still kind of struggling with this idea that they got to schedule their own classes and that if they didn't show up to class, nothing happened. No one called their mom and dad and told them they had to get to class. They just failed. And both of them ended up losing out on scholarships and having to figure out other living situations because they had kind of expected it to be more like high school. So I saw this really big culture shock for people coming out of public school, which was kind of sad to me because I felt like they had spent 12 years preparing for this moment. And when they got there, it was really hard and a big struggle for them, whereas I had played for 12 years and got to college and just kind of felt like I got to keep playing and having a good time. So it was a pretty easy and natural and slow transition. It was one very, very, very small step at a time. Take this class. Maybe now take a class that requires a test. Now take 2 classes, and just a kind of a gradual process.
Cool. Yeah. I have sort of an interesting relationship with college and that whole sort of system because growing up in Davis, it's an extremely academically driven town. It's a university town. A lot of my friends, parents were professors or, kids are taking insane class. They're in AP chemistry, AP calculus when they're, sophomores, freshmen. I have some friends too who are taking math classes and other classes at UC Davis. Everyone gets into really good schools. Everyone gets into, I think the year I graduated, like something like 50 kids went to Cal Berkeley. 15 kids went to Stanford, Yale, Harvard. I mean, if you basically, there's sort of the stigma that if you get into, like a Chico State or Sonoma State or something a little bit that's perceived as, less than, that there's something sort of wrong with you, or you get made fun of. And, I knew I wasn't going to go to college right after I did independent study. That was just something that I knew I wasn't, it would be rushing it too much. I needed, sort of like Rose, like I take it step by step, take that time, incrementally get closer and closer to where you want to be. So I wasn't even in that sort of, oh, he's going to Chico State group. I was in the lower rung of, he's going to take a year off and then go to community college. But that was the only sort of option that felt right, or that felt, that I knew it was the right option. And at that point, I don't know if I fully knew if I was going to go on to a 4-year university. I mean, that was definitely the plan, but I wouldn't have been super upset if it didn't happen. So I'd try and, I'd apply. I applied to, so I did, I think, 3 years at community college. I went to a community college in Sacramento called American River Community College. And I lived at home and commuted. It was about a half-hour drive. It was great. I loved it. And also, like Rose, I sort of eased into it. So the first semester I took classes I was comfortable with. I think I took intro to film, a couple other film screenwriting class, and like tennis or something like that. And it did sort of set me back a year, because I was transferring in the fall to a 4-year institution. So I had to take another, full year if I was, basically all of those classes didn't transfer to where I was going. So it was sort of just a throwaway semester, which, looking back on it, was super essential. Like I felt very prepared to take that next step. But I needed sort of that time just to get used to it. And that was sort of my first traditional classroom experience. Was when I was 18, going to my first intro to film class. And I remember it being weird for like the first minute. And then I was like, oh, well, this is just like the movies. This is just, this classroom is exactly how I'd expected. There's a periodic table on the wall, and, all this stuff. And there's a little fold out desk, and I have a notebook and a backpack, it's just like, it felt so, like, okay, cool. I'm over it. And so I did 3 years at community college. I applied to, USC, UCLA, and Chapman. I only got in one, and that was USC, which it was the really, really the only one that I wanted. It was my top choice, by far the much more expensive choice. But after visiting all 3 schools, there was no comparison. The facilities were just so much better, and the faculty and the staff, everything, it was just perfect. And so I transferred in, and it was this amazing experience because, you transfer in and it's extremely hard to get in. I think the year I did it, the acceptance rate was something like 4.5%, which at the time was lower than Harvard Law's rate, which, so it was crazy, this crazy experience. You get in and you're with all these other people who are thinking the exact same thing. Like, oh my God, how the hell did we get, how am I here right now? And that was sort of sustained for that entire first semester. You'd walk to class, you just look around and be like, this is insane. But, I think if I hadn't, and USC was by far, the most rigorous thing I've done, especially film school, was extremely hard. On top of, they make you take all these other GEs and other courses on top of it. Even though I had gone to community college, USC wants your money. So I'm still getting calls about it. Can you donate? But so, I think if I hadn't sort of done, looking way back, going from completely unschooling to a little bit more structured, right, into independent study, and taking more formal writing and classes like that, and then easing into community college and sort of mastering that or getting very comfortable with that, and then moving on to the next level and the next, whatever that next level might be. I think for me was also very important to sort of know where I'm at in relation to what I'm doing, and sort of realizing that, sometimes you can't just jump in. You need to, and I think for me that's very true, is like you just need to ease into things. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about homeschooling, is that I have come to know myself very well. So I know when something's not going to work. I know it before it even happens. I know when something's going to be difficult, or when something, I know myself and how I operate. And I think, that's proven to be a very valuable thing to have as an adult, and working in a professional environment and stuff. It's, and I think not all of my school friends had that same thing. They'd kind of go, and then, oh man, I messed up, right? They sort of aren't operating on that. They're not in tune with what they themselves need fully.
Yeah. I guess my college experience was, it was kind of in tune with, I think, both of y'all. I started out in community college, took an active place for test, passed everything, I think, except mathematics. I think I took remedial 1, and then I was into regular math. So it was honestly a super easy fix. And if I could have the choice to have taken math classes in a classroom setting for years and years and years, or just take a 1 semester of remedial math, I think it's a really easy choice for me. Just like, oh, never mind, screw that. But yeah, I went to a couple different community colleges first. And I just kind of started out with the basic classes, because I had no idea what I was going to study. I think my first major I was forced to declare when I went into sophomore year in a community college. I think it's weird that you'd have to declare in a community college. So I declared anthropology, and journalism was my minor. And then later on, when I wanted to transfer to Texas State in San Marcos, something possessed me to change to communications and journalism, just switch my minor and my major around. Either way, it would have worked out. I feel like my end goal from college was to go into the Peace Corps anyway. So honestly, my degree really didn't mean much to me as far as like what I wanted to work in or anything like that. I will say that after having dabbled in journalism, in print media, in radio, and just and then just constantly been around people that are gung-ho, want to be in journalism, I did realize that this was not a field that I wanted to work in. It was something that I'm glad that I studied, because I feel like you do have to study it, and you do kind of have to do an internship or two to kind of know what it's like in a journalism field. I really, it's a little bit pessimistic, but I liked the movie Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal, because that's actually pretty accurate as to what's going through these guys' heads, is how can I get the next big story and things like that. So I learned that by being working at the school paper, working at the community radio station, DJing. I love DJing. DJing is fun because literally there's no pressure. It's just put out the music that you like. and try to entertain people. That element of mass communications I loved, was to try to entertain people, try to tell people stories, try to tell people what you're talking, like what's interesting to you. The gritty side is just that. It gets really, really gnarly. And I learned that honestly a little bit the hard way. And it kind of, it was kind of interesting going through that in college, learning through classes and then through internships about a work field. And I had done that in as a homeschooler in my high school period, just getting exposed to different things all the time. But I think that getting in there, I was still probably coming out of college. Like, I came out with a journalism degree and an anthropology minor, and had I not gotten accepted into Peace Corps, I probably would have been like, I had no idea what I'm going to do. Probably just because I knew I didn't want to work in my career field. And I was just reading a statistic the other day that like 60% of people with undergraduate degrees do not work in their career field. And it's a really sad statistic when you know that like the average college debt's in the 30,000 range, probably more than that now. And so I have become very, I don't want to say cynical, but distrustful of the college system, or at least as like a pay your tons of money in college system, just because it seems like another one of those things that we were told that we have to do to succeed in life. If you want to be somebody, you went to college type thing. I've heard a million times, not from my parents, thankfully. My parents really just kind of said, well, what do you want to do? Well, this is what you're going to do in order to do that. That was probably about as close to being asked to, like, being pushed towards college that my parents ever did. But I guess as far as how classes affected me, it was the very first time going back to a class schedule since like 7 years old. And so it was a little bit different. I definitely feel like I was the loudmouth participant of all my classes that all the other students hated because we couldn't get through the class. I was definitely that one kid. I say kid, I was 20. But I just treated classes very differently. And I would actually ran into people after classes, way after I had taken a class, we'd all passed it, and like a year later, I ran into a guy that sat next to me in class. Like, was I annoying in that class? I would ask them, and they were like, yeah, we hated you, man. And so there was a lot of that. But one of the things that I did early on when I started college, and I recommend this to anybody, if you're going to go to college, if you're going to study in an academic environment like college, or a trade skill school or something like that, is I would highly recommend that everybody take a VARC test, visual, auditory, reading, writing, or kinesthetic learning style. That's something I did in my first year in a class. They said, I want you to take this test. It's a bunch of different questions. Like, if somebody asks you, where's the bathroom? Do you point and walk them there? Or do you draw a map? Or do you kind of give them verbal instructions? And how would you prefer someone to if you ask somebody, where's the bathroom? How do you want them to do it? And I was like, I want them to just tell me. And so I learned from that I'm an auditory learner. I sit down and listen to people talk, and I learn from that. Versus reading a textbook, or versus taking notes. I'm absolutely terrible at taking notes because I'm up and looking and listening to this person talk. I'm also very kinesthetic. So if it's something that it requires some kind of body motion for me to learn, I can learn that really, really fast. But if you want me to read a textbook and then pass a test, I probably won't pass it, just because I'm especially if I only read it one time, just because it never worked for me. And I'm glad that I took that kind of like, it's not a personality test, it's a learning style test. And it was something that I think helped me not have to repeat classes or something like that, and actually helped me pass classes a lot faster because I knew what I had to do in order to succeed in a class. I knew I had to be there. I couldn't miss classes. I couldn't, oh, we're going to go over that chapter today. Oh, I'll just read the chapter. I knew I couldn't do that. That was not a way that I could function. So I was pretty much always there. Oh no, I think I just got kicked out. No, I'm back. Never mind. Just freaked out on me. Never mind. Something flew across the screen and said, I don't know. Never mind. Anyway, that's how that worked for me.
Okay, now you're still here with us. I don't know, it kind of flashed a little bit. So just really quickly, can we go through the three of you and tell me, did any of you take the SAT or the ACT?
Nope.
So nobody can see you say, so everybody, if you could just come on one at a time and say yes or no for SAT and ACT.
I didn't take it.
I've never taken a standardized test of any kind.
The only standardized test I've ever taken was the CASI, the California High School Exit Exam in high school, because I had to with independent study. But yeah, no SAT, no ACT.
So I think
I guess I took the AccuPlacer test for like community college, but that's not a standardized thing. That's just
right. Yeah, I think that it's interesting for parents to hear that, because I think that a lot of times they get very into the idea that how are they going to pass the SAT, how are they going to pass the ACT, and they got those big thick books for learning it. And
colleges don't even like those anymore.
Yeah,
because they're not reflective of whether or not a student will succeed in college. It's just a reading test.
Yeah,
and more than anything else, it's a reading test.
I think there's a lot of changes that could be happening in the admissions. We can hope, but I think that's interesting that you guys transferred in as community college students and didn't have to take that test. Okay, so because we only have about 15 more minutes, there's a couple of things I wanted to get to, and one of them is if you were talking to teenagers that were, what would you tell them as far as if they're going to be homeschooled, or maybe they're coming out of school and they're thinking, I don't know if this is a good idea. Am I screwing up my life? But everybody knows that the school thing isn't working. Well, would you tell them anything, that there's some advantages or tips that you might give them for how to be successful, or something you wish that you had done? Maybe you would be able to help somebody along the way like that. Jared, go ahead.
I mean, I think and this is something that I've sort of come to learn fairly recently, is, I think if people tend to freak out, and it tends to be, this type of thing where people are very concerned about how is this going to affect my future. And I think if the sooner you can sort of get in tune with what you want to do, or where you want to end up, or how you work best, like knowing how you work or how you operate, alongside, your goals. If you can sort of combine those two and just not be afraid. So, maybe if you're thinking about homeschooling and you're not quite sure, it's kind of iffy, or, it's a little scary, and understandably so. I guess my advice would be to, you can always change it, right? I mean, it's not set in stone. Try it. If it doesn't work, try something else. And that's something that I tend to sort of not operate that way. That's something that I've just sort of started doing, very recently. So just sort of trying things, seeing what sticks. And I think that, maybe you try homeschooling if that's what feels right at the time, and maybe that works for a few years, and maybe you do something else. Or, like for me, I was completely unschooled and then did independent study, because that's what, that's what was right for me at that time. And then I took the year off because that was right for me at that time. So I think just being very in tune with where you stand and how you operate and where you sort of your motives or goals or where you want to go is extremely important.
Okay, thanks, Jared. Michael?
Okay, so a question came up in the feed, and it says that they've heard that homeschooling is the primary bastion in the U.S. for creationism, and that homeschoolers suffer in STEM degrees in university. Just not advocating either position, just wanting to ask us for our opinions on the matter. Literally in the 3 seconds that it took me to read that, I just turned to my tablet and Googled science degrees, homeschooling problems, and I can't find any sort of comment to that because I've never heard that whatsoever. I've actually can't think. Let's see, several of my friends that have gone on to multiple science degrees. Not that anybody knows names in here, but I guess like Chris Grenade, I remember him. He had 3 degrees. 3 master's degrees or something. It's some insane number of education that this man has. I know that the largest number of homeschool groups are fundamental religious groups, and that is true. But I don't understand where that concept that we do well in science or math or technology, and I think someone's feeding you misinformation because that just sounds crazy to me. It's not true.
I know I can talk from an extremely anecdotal and personal level that I know homeschoolers and unschoolers who have degrees in STEM fields, just like Mike. My husband being one of them. He was a Christian homeschooler. Like I mentioned before, they were a throw everything at the wall and see what sticks kind of homeschooling family. So they definitely didn't follow a strictly, strongly religious curriculum, but they definitely are Christian homeschoolers. They were Christian homeschoolers. And he is an IT, he works in IT now and has been passionately interested in all kinds of different science and technological related fields since he was a little kid, and was encouraged to pursue those. His father is in IT. He has a degree in IT and works in that field now. I have another friend who was radically unschooled his entire life, and I could not tell you the name of the actual program because it was some ridiculously long name, where basically the idea was we're going to study every single different kind of science, technology, engineering, math thing there is. It was basically just a general STEM degree. So anecdotally, I can say that it's not true. But definitely I think there are these stereotypes about homeschoolers. We touched a lot on the social aspect, right? There's a stereotype that homeschoolers are all Christian, all homeschooling for Christian or religious reasons, which is, there's a difference. Something like 70% of Americans identify as Christian, so therefore a large portion of homeschoolers identify as Christian, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those people are homeschooling for religious reasons or using a religious curriculum. So there is this stereotype that all homeschoolers are Christian, homeschooling through a Christian program. We sit at the kitchen table, we do math workbooks, and we never go outside of our homes. And we've talked a lot about the social elements of that and even the academic sides and why those stereotypes aren't true. And yet people hold on to them. People who don't understand homeschooling, haven't met homeschoolers or a lot of homeschoolers, just kind of parrot back information. And so like Mike said, there's a good chance that you're getting misinformation. I know when I first started at my university, my roommate, we were out walking around on the pier at Santa Monica, and she mentioned homeschooling. I can't remember why it came up, and had a list of one after another, all these stereotypes about homeschoolers. And when I asked her, after we had the awkward conversation of, well, I was homeschooled, it's going to be really fun to live with you for the next 9 months, I asked her, why do you have these ideas? Why is this your thought? And she knew one family. She knew one family. They were Christian homeschoolers. They sat at home at the kitchen table. So I think we need to be really careful that we don't make assumptions or that we don't take outdated stereotypes, because certainly there was traditionally in homeschooling, there have been a lot of religious homeschoolers, but homeschooling, as Mike said, is a relatively young movement, and certainly as homeschooling has grown, different branches of homeschooling, including secular homeschooling, has grown tremendously. So this idea that we're all religious homeschoolers and therefore are shying away from science, math, technology, all that fun stuff, I don't think it holds any water anymore.
Yeah, and I would even say that, like, heck, I was in a science club during my high school years in homeschooling, and we did use a religious science curriculum. I didn't stick around in that particular science club, at least until I had really gotten my fill of looking through microscopes and stuff like that. But we learned a lot of good information in that particular science group that I was in. But I knew it wasn't like it was something that because I was getting used to, I think, probably doing a lot of my own, being very autonomous in my education. I was questioning a lot of things, and I would get in trouble in the university for dueling with professors about things. They would talk to me about permissive parenting and things like that, and I would just go right at them, and I had no problem arguing with authority over something that didn't make sense to me, education wise. But yeah, I wouldn't say that was something that was ever a situation for me.
And then we lose him. He says
no, I was picking her up off the floor. She needed to make her cameo.
Happy. Okay.
She needed to make her cameo. All right. Now she's like, all right, I'm out of here.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how people have ideas about stereotypes. And I think things like this, where we can talk to real live people who have gone through this and how they are, how y'all's lives were and where you lived and how it happened. It helps defeat those kinds of stereotypes. I think, Rose, you made a good point that lots of times stereotypes come from way back. They're not even current, but maybe back in the 80s when, whatever was happening in private schools, and I won't bore you with the things that I know happened and why this thing moved the way it did. But I think that having real people available to answer questions and to talk to families the way y'all are doing it is the best way to help people see, because the problem with those stereotypes is then somebody doesn't choose to do it. And so they have some kid that's sitting in a school withering away, miserable, that could have had a way different life. And so I love that we're able to talk about this. So if we want to just kind of wrap up with what you see as probably your biggest advantages, or if you have any words of advice for parents that are thinking they'd like to do it, but they're scared and they don't know if it's a good idea. Rose, you want to jump on this one?
Sure. I like to steal something that my oldest sister, Roya, has said time and time again on panels. She said it once and I heard it and thought, I'm going to use that every time I have to talk about homeschooling. Where she talks about how the biggest gift that our mom gave us, because really it was my mom's decision to take us out of school. My dad is from Iran, where school is everything. Very, very rigorous academically. He only came here because he was going to graduate school. He saw school as the most important thing. So my mom said, I'm going to take them out of school. And my dad said, great, these American schools are lousy. They don't do nearly enough academics. They're not nearly rigorous enough. That's perfect. Take them out of school. We can do it better at home. And my mom said, great, sure, honey. That's totally what we're going to do. And my dad learned along with us and has become a very strong proponent of unschooling. But really, it was my mom kind of leading the charge. My mom has a background in education. She's a teacher. Her sisters are both teachers. Her mom was a teacher. We are a strong education, early childhood education family. And so it was a big thing for my mom to do this weird thing. She was a school superstar and has a graduate degree. My dad has a graduate degree. Like, school was a big deal in our family. And so this idea that she was just going to take us out and she was going to trust us to do our own thing. Roya has said before how that trust in us is the biggest gift my mom could ever have given us. And I totally agree. that I feel now as an adult and I felt as a kid and a teenager. I can do anything. I can be brave. I can make anything work. I can figure out my resources. I can ask people for help. I can do it. And I feel like it all comes back from that very early in my life. I was 4, that very, very early influence of my mom saying, we can do this better. We can trust our kids. You guys know what you need. You guys know how to learn and how to be people. You don't need to be put in this box for 12 years and come out on the other side. You are people right now, and we can do this together. So I feel like that's impacted me as a person more tremendously than I can explain. People ask me sometimes, like, well, did you like homeschooling? Are you going to homeschool your kids? What do you think you'd be like without homeschooling? And of course, the answer is yes, I loved homeschooling. Absolutely, I'm going to homeschool my kids. And that's like asking me, what would your life be like if you grew up in another country, or you were a different gender, or you had no arms or legs? Homeschooling is such a part of me that I don't even know how to answer a question about how would you be different if you weren't homeschooled. So it affects everything. So sometimes people ask this question, what are the advantages you have because you're homeschooled? And it's hard to answer that because it's everything. Every advantage I have is because I was homeschooled. But I definitely think when I look, especially when I was in college, when you look at these kids, they felt like kids because they might have been 18 or 19 or 20, but they were babies just starting to kind of figure out their own lives. When you look at them, they just floundered a little bit. Even the ones who were doing a good job, they were just starting to get to figure out what they were doing and how to be people. And I feel like I've gotten to be a person since I was born. And that's huge. It meant that I got a lot more out of my classes. It meant that I was able to talk to adults comfortably and learn things from them. It meant that when I wanted a job, I was able to step up and say, I can do this. I'm awesome. I'm capable. I have people to support me. I have resources. And so I've gotten all these opportunities and experiences and just all these wonderful things that I could easily have missed out on if I hadn't had that little kernel of confidence that really I feel like was implanted in me when my mom said, no, we can do better. You guys are capable on your own.
Yeah, no, I kind of want to echo what Rose just said, because a lot of that resonated with me personally. And the word, when you said trust, that was the big thing that jumped out at me, because that was very much the case in our situation. Our setup too was, there was never a moment where my parents ever doubted, anything, that like, oh, is it going to turn out okay? Is this the right path? Is this a mistake? At least if there was any of that, I didn't hear of it, but I don't think there was. It would have come through regardless. But I think, having that trust is huge. And whatever the kid wants to do, whether it's homeschool or unschool or go to school or, whatever it is, just trusting that their choice is right and their opinion is right, and letting the kid explore that, and letting the kid fail if that is part of that. I think for me too, like I said before, like I'm always sort of searching for that boundary, and failure is a huge part of that. So, I think just having that trust that in the end it's all going to be fine is essential. And I think I'm very grateful for my parents who were very much that way, and who were supported me. And that I attribute that's the reason why I'm here now doing what I'm doing, is because who if you're not trusted, who's gonna this crazy kid with this crazy dream move to LA and go to film school and get into one of the crazy stupidest industries there is, with such so much at stake and everything. It's so I am very grateful to have had that in my life, and that's, I think, if you just trust the kid, then everything will, the dust will settle. It'll be a little chaotic at times, or at first, But the dust will settle and everything will sort of fall into place the way it's supposed to. And I think that's, if you clamp down and you freak out and you're concerned that, it's going to hamper things or harm things, and it's going to change the way the final outcome. So I think, that if you trust the kid, you follow the kid, that it's all going to be fine. That, you're not going to go wrong.
I guess my kind of my parting wisdom, I guess, if you will, is if you have teenagers and you're worried about whether or not they're prepared for life, if they're preparing for life, just turn that little voice off. Instead focus time and effort on exposing them to things that they're interested in. Get them as much possible, as many possible options as they can possibly have to help them narrow down their fields of interest, and not spend time worrying about things like standardized tests or whether or not they're getting enough life experiences. Because if they're getting exposed to all different kinds of social clubs, organizations, volunteer work, youth on the job training things or something like that, then they're getting plenty of life experiences. And with all that extra time that they're going to have in the day to dedicate to whatever they're interested in, is not going to get poorly spent. I mean, you're going to have days where all you want to do is sleep. Well, you know what? I mean, some days you just need to sleep. Other days, I mean, you're going to have days that all they want to do is binge watch Game of Thrones or something like that. And yeah, I'll definitely have a day or two of that. But don't think that's the end of the world. That's going to, like, in some way cause a problem or stunt that kid's growth. Just instead just kind of let that fear go away. They're not going to fail, because there's no failure in life. There's just more time. It's the one resource that we're told that is, the time is money. It's the one resource that you have just a ton of, and you can use, especially when you're not cooped up into things that you don't want to be in. You have even more of it. So don't worry. That's like probably my number one advice that I can give, is just don't worry. And yeah, I can already see people kind of starting to jam to the song, but yeah. So yeah, that's kind of my advice for everybody. Just don't worry about it.
Oh, that was so awesome. You guys, this was a great show. I'm so happy to have been able to host this, and I'm really thankful to Lainey for letting me bring you guys here. I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people. So you can find out more about everybody at the show's page that we listed at the front of the show. For the Love of Learning is the name of it, and we're episode number 55. I want to thank Nina for helping us get this all set up, and I want to thank Biggie for being there in the background, helping us figure this all out. We wouldn't have known what to do without him. And we're just really grateful for these conversations, to be able to have a place to have them so that people can learn more and their kids can experience something a little bit differently. And I hope that these young adults gave you the reassurance that you might have been looking for when you first tuned into the program. And I want to thank you all for joining us, and wherever you are and whatever you do, we hope that you do it with a love for learning.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. if we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCM broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.